Hi friends, welcome to Makan and Meaning. Today we'll be discussing Dina Zaman's Malayland, and I'll be sharing my thoughts and opinions about it. In Makan and Meaning, I hope to provide thoughtful, kind and nuanced videos about the books I've read.
Today we are eating prata.
And I'll be talking about each chapter. And I think this is a bit of a different book review because I won't be dwelling too much on the contents, don't want to give away too much of the book. So try not to have too many spoilers. But there'll be spoilers in the sense that I'll be reflecting on my thoughts as a Singaporean Chinese person on this book. There are 7 chapters, like the 7 heavens in Islam, and a prologue. So I'll be talking about each section and my thoughts about them. So in chapter 1 of the book, I'll be quoting from the first 3 paragraphs. I hope the author and the publisher doesn't mind, because I think it's very, very striking and gives you a sense of what the book is about. Chapter 1, Past and Present. Writing during a pandemic was challenging. I embarked on this project simply to learn why some members of my ethnic group chose to fight for causes that made little sense to me. Why some chose to believe in heretics. Why others viewed their own people with distaste. But virtual interviews are shorn of the essence of their subjects, as well as the nuances of physical conversations and interactions. When I reviewed my notes, I fretted. Will this book be readable? The early drafts were filled with transcriptions of interviews, and even then, not all of them were used. The text felt flat because I didn't go out into the field. I had also exercised a different writing style in the past few years. Reports and briefs for Iman research, articles. Oh dear. Yet, the book had to be written. The narrative on the ground has been reduced to media soundbites, with the subjects constantly represented by activists and academics of all stripes, from the far right to liberals alike. In conversations about Malayness, can these experts be truly considered as speaking on behalf of the average Malay? Is there such a person as an average Malay? Who am I to speak on our behalf? So I think I really liked the funny and humorous tone throughout the book. I think it was great that there was humor because it's such a heavy topic, talking about what it means to be Malay, what it means to be Muslim, or what it means to be Malaysian, and how these identities have been conflated. So in every chapter, there are many, many footnotes. I think it's because the author was an academic, and I think it's great. So I read so many articles on Malaysia Kini from the Star that I think I never read before. So great job. And there's so many books I want to read, but I think they can only be bought in Malaysia. So I think good job on that. If you're interested in reading more, I would highly suggest, if you get this book, to really check out the footnotes. I think it was very interesting that it was Dina as a third culture kid who grew up as a child of diplomats. She traveled around the world as a child, and I think when she came back, she never really felt truly the Malay or the Muslim that people in Malaysia categorize themselves as. So in the book, she always talks about not being Malay enough, and what does that even mean, right? And when I read that, I was reminded of Madam Halimah. So Madam Halimah, for those who don't know, was Singapore's previous president, and I thought it was interesting that there was a Wikipedia war on her race. So I believe that her race was Indian, but was changed to Malay. So I think people are very concerned that because the presidency was reserved for Malays, that her race on Wikipedia needed to be Malay. So people kept changing it back and forth. But I believe on her IC it was Indian, if I'm not wrong. And I think that was interesting because I always considered Madam Halimah as a Malay person. Not just because she wears the tudong, but I think because she always concerns herself with Malay-Muslim affairs in Singapore. And yeah, I respect her as a Malay-Muslim leader. But I thought it was interesting that that people felt the need to adjust her race on Wikipedia. I think that reflects how fragile the concept of race is, and how much we have inherited this thinking from the colonial masters, the British, and it's something to think about. So to quote that, the author says, until one decided upon their identity, it would remain policed by others. And another quote from the next page is, what it means to be Malay is a constant, but it also does evolve. In chapter 2, academically speaking, I learned that in Malaysia, wealthy, elite Malays look down on country bumpkins because they voted for a party that the elites didn't like. So I'm reminded of how in Singapore, a lot of Malaysian Chinese people come. So when I was in school, in high school, and even as a working adult, I used to be housemates with a Malaysian Chinese couple. So my Malaysian Chinese friends in high school came to Singapore and also in university because there was a lack of opportunities for them there. Even if they did well in school, it was difficult to secure a place in a university they wanted because of the Bumi Putra policy, where I think there was a quota reserved for Malays. So they came to Singapore instead, even though it was more expensive. And like I think my classmates in school, they had to wake up at 4 or 5 a.m. to take the bus here every morning through the causeway. And then they had to take a bus back. Like it was a 2-hour journey back and forth, so 4 hours every day, which was quite admirable. And the chapter also talks about racial animosity. And it's really striking because I think that it reminds me of the racial riots in the 1960s, which led to the divorce of Singapore and Malaysia. And this is very striking because 60 years later, it's still happening today. So I think racial tensions are something that are hard to eliminate as long as everyone is in their own tribe and doesn't try to understand the other and reach out. Like the author has, she reached out to various factions so to better understand everybody's positions. I don't think that's something that people do often, because when she reached out to one group, the other group accused her. But yeah, I think what is important to me is that in this book there's a lot of nuance, and nuance is lost on social media, and nuance is lost on the internet. But to truly understand the other, you need to go out and interact with the other to understand them, because I think that's the cause of a lot of conflict in the world. Another quotable quote on page 36 and 37, every group wants to be Islamic and Malay, but different, we surmised. It was not just a dilemma about whether, for example, Arabization was bad and local identity good, but also what was played out in the spectrum of ideological positions occupied by PAS, ABIM, JIM, IKRAM, and Ikatan Muslimin Malaysia, ISMA. Yeah, so speaking about Arabization, it reminds me of a queer Muslim talk I had during Zoom when I was trying to learn more about Islam. But I think we discussed during one session on Zoom about Arabization. So especially about surrounding the topic of Hari Raya. So in Singapore, I grew up with the phrase Selamat Hari Raya. But in recent years, I think the past 3 to 5 years, we say Eid Mubarak. So sorry for the bad pronunciation. But it was very interesting because in a Zoom conversation during COVID, we discussed how in Singapore, even though the majority of the Muslims are Malay, and we're cool with Selamat Hari Raya, there's a bunch of Bangladeshi workers who are migrant workers who build our houses and the roads and stuff. They are also Muslim, and you see them praying at mosques during Ramadan, but they're not Malay. And with this Arabization, like the words like I resonate more with them. But on the other hand, it feels like we are losing a part of local Malay culture. So it's difficult, right? And it was interesting because I have an Indian ex-Muslim friend. When I told him about how my Malay friends, they seek forgiveness from their parents on the first day of Hari Raya, he said it was very, very foreign to him because as an Indian Muslim family, they celebrated Hari Raya differently. So that was striking to me. And this was over nasi padang, which he still loves. And yeah, I think a lot of Chinese Singaporean, they don't realize that there are many, many different ways of being Muslim. So I also had a friend at university. He is a Chinese Muslim person, and people always spoke to him in Chinese at the canteen, but he couldn't reply because he spoke Malay growing up. And I think the concept of a Chinese Muslim is very strange to a lot of people just because they haven't been exposed to it. But not too long ago, I went to a Chinese Muslim restaurant with some of my Muslim friends who wanted to try it out. I think it's from the founders are from China, I think a Muslim region in China, and they came to Singapore, and the noodles were so good. I think it's important for us to realize that there are different ways of being Muslim, just like there are different ways of being Christian, different ways of being Buddhist, different ways of being Taoist, and instead of always compressing everybody into a fixed mold. Yeah, so I think it's important to respect that and to understand that. In addition, we should acknowledge that Arabization is certainly a thing. I have a friend who is a Muslim scholar. He told me that a lot of Malay names in Singapore presently are very Arabic. But 100 years ago in Singapore, the names were very, very different. Yeah, I think that's very interesting. So I also learned something interesting on page 40 in chapter 2. It says Article 160 constitutionally, in both senses of the term, explicitly defines Malays as Muslim who habitually speak Malay, adhere to Malay customs, were born in Malaya or Singapore before or on Independence Day, and resided in either territory. Thus, Malayness and Muslimness are, legally speaking, two sides of a coin. I didn't know in Malaysia it's like part of the constitution, and the constitution defines what it means to be Malay and what it means to be Muslim. But as we'll see in the rest of the book, I think legal definitions are one thing, but lived realities are a different thing. And it doesn't mean that it's wrong. Either is wrong. It just means that there are different ways of being, I guess. And speaking of which, another quotable quote on page 46. Is our understanding of Islam the real Islam? He asked. We laughed. Muslims in Malaysia are just like how the Malays are, diverse in thought, ideology, and practice because of its believers. While Muslims here generally follow the stringent Shafi'i school of thought, there are also Hanafi Muslims, Maliki ones, and yes, the much feared and despised Ahmadiyya and Shia. Even the outlaw Sufis can still hide here. I didn't know that Sufis were outlawed in Malaysia. And yeah, it reminds me of once I listened to a panel discussion in Singapore, interfaith discussion, and he talked about how there's a Sunni and Shia divide in Singapore, and my friend was in the minority, and it was discriminated against. So that was very interesting to me. I didn't even know that existed. I guess this book is very interesting to me because I'm ignorant about a lot of these things, whether in Malaysia or in Singapore. So this book was really eye-opening for me. In chapter 3, the ethnocentrists, I learned a new term, which is the Tanjak boys. So I never heard of that before, and it was very interesting to learn and read more about them through the book and also through the articles linked in the book. And yeah, so ethnocentrists, which like the Tanjak boys are different from Islamicists, which will be in a later chapter that I'll talk about. What the Tanjak boys are their movement to wear traditional Malay ethnic costumes as a way to push back against westernization like colonization or Arabization. So like they're proud of their Malay and Muslim identities, which the author and I think is cool, but I think some people are against it. I also learned a new word, the Malay agenda, which the author says it's like a bit nebulous. And yeah, I think it's very interesting in Singapore because people have been accused of a different agenda, which I'll not talk about today, but in a separate video. And I'd like to give you another quotable quote. Yeah, so she interviewed someone who said, "We just uphold Malay culture and heritage," he stated boldly, speaking about the circle of friends around him. And so here is the riddle, the enigma at the heart of this chapter. What is someone who is proud of their culture, race, and language? 1, a supremacist, or 2, simply a passionate student and advocate. And to stretch the question further, what did that make me? So I think it's a bit relevant to Singapore because I didn't even know that there were Malay supremacists in Malaysia. And it reminds me when I read that chapter of the accusation of Chinese supremacists in Singapore. As a Chinese Singaporean person myself, I don't know if there are Chinese supremacists in Singapore. There's certainly Chinese privilege. I think that this concept of Chinese supremacy has been imported from the West, where white supremacists are prevalent, but a lot of Chinese people I know are very westernized, like we're bananas or jiakenten. We might look Chinese on the outside, but inside we think like a Westerner. So I don't know whether they promote a Chinese agenda in a sense. So I don't think we can call that Chinese supremacy. But I think we can definitely say that Chinese privilege. It's easier to get jobs, get rent homes, and a whole host of other things, right? So yeah, it's true, there's Chinese privilege, but I'm not sure about the word Chinese supremacists. But yeah, it's interesting to learn about Malay supremacists in Malaysia, and I think it's, as the book says, I think it's a natural pushback, and it's normal to want to do something like this if you feel like your culture is being eroded by westernization or by Arabization. Yeah, so I think in the book, in this chapter, it was very interesting that the author was accused of sympathizing with the Kanjak boys, the ethnocentrists, because she went to interview them just to understand their point of view to write about this book. But yeah, if you are Malay and Muslim, if you're Malay, if you're Muslim, in Malaysia, Singapore, around the world, and if you read this book, please tag me on YouTube, and I'll be happy to watch your perspective, because I think it's really interesting to hear from individuals, their lived experiences. So yes, please tag me, and I would love to hear more about that, especially when you read the book and tell me your perspectives on that, because mine is limited as a person who's a Chinese Singaporean living in this country. And chapter 4 is the professionals, and she asks, what does it mean to be a liberal Malay? Does it mean that you are supportive of the queer community? Yeah, so it vaguely reminds me of a Channel News Asia documentary where they interview a bunch of people across races, across groups in Singapore, and I think there was a fallout because an imam who was interviewed or an ustaz, he didn't outright condemn homosexuality. So he was condemned for that, and I don't know what to think. I haven't watched the documentary. I think it has been told to me it's a bit triggering, so I don't want to watch it now until I'm ready. But I thought it was interesting that just because an imam spoke about his position and didn't outright condemn the queer Muslims, that he was condemned, and he had to come out and clarify his position if I'm not wrong. And now to chapter 5. So this chapter talks about women, specifically those who wear the tudong. And yeah, they have accusations of not being Malay enough. If they stand up for queer rights, I think one of the women she interviewed stood up for transgender people on Twitter, and I think there was a very big blowback. Yeah, so I think it was very interesting to read this chapter because it reminded me of my friend at my workplace. So what happened was she put on the tudong, took it off, put it on, and then took it off again. And each time she did, I think she faced a lot of criticisms by colleagues at the workplace because I think it was largely conservative. So she said no one should be able to judge me except Allah, which yeah, I think is true. So I think it's very difficult because in the book also it says that whether you put on the tudong or not, just because you put on the tudong doesn't mean you're automatically conservative. Some people put it on because it's easier to get access to places if you appear to be conservative, which I think was very interesting. Yeah, so the way you dress is a bit policed. And it reminds me of how, like, if you're Gen Z, you might not know that in Singapore only recently, I think public servants are allowed to wear tudongs. I think it was a big thing for nurses in Singapore. And I think it was also announced either in the National Day rally or in some big speech. I remember the Prime Minister announcing that this tudong wearing was a thing. So it's a big thing. And I think it was very interesting that in the book, in this chapter, it was interesting in this chapter that they also brought up the various types of Malay, like Boyanese, Javanese, and the rest. And I was reminded that, like my friend, he said that like him being Boyanese was discriminated because most of the other Malay friends he had were Javanese. And I didn't even know that in the Malay umbrella there were various categories or like tribes, and they like, I guess it's sort of like, to me, infighting, which I thought was interesting and he thought was strange. Yeah, because I guess every group has their own unique culture and identity. And I thought it was interesting also that I learned that like in Malaysia and in Indonesia it's a bit different, because in Indonesia, if I'm not mistaken, Malay is one of many different identities of like Malay and then Javanese, Boyanese. But in Malaysia it's a bit different. It's like in Singapore, it's all grouped together as like Malay is both the Boyanese, Javanese and all the others. So yeah, that was very interesting to me. I mean, I would like to learn more about that. Like, what is the difference between Boyanese and Javanese and all of that. So I guess I'll do more reading. If you know of good books, please recommend me in the comments. And in chapter 6, the Islamicists, I thought it was very interesting because when I read about Islamic fundamentalism, I'm reminded that in Singapore, there are also Christian fundamentalists who believe that women shouldn't work. So admittedly, they are a minority, but they exist. So my point is that it's not just Islam that has fundamentalists. Christians also have. In fact, in any religion, there's Buddhist fundamentalists. I mean, it's present in every religion if you take it to an extreme. It's more practiced like a moderate middle way. And once again, I think the author points out the legal intertwining of being Malay and Muslim. And that's interesting to me. I'm also reminded that it was only, I think, last year that I realized that apostasy is illegal in Malaysia, which is a bit of a shock to me because I think it's not illegal in Singapore. It just has different consequences, but not of the legal sort. Yeah, so I'm also curious about in Malaysia, like what happens to people who are Indian Muslim or Chinese Muslim, like the roti canai that was served in many interviews, yeah, by Indian Muslims, right? So like, what sort of lives do they live? I'm curious to know what sort of lives they live. And like Chinese Muslims and also the converts, like how do they live their lives and what sort of identities do they assume and what sort of needs do they have as Muslims in Malaysia? And if you are one, please comment. I would love to learn more about your life in Malaysia. And chapter 7, last but not the least. So in this last chapter, 7, she reflects on her identity. What does it mean to be Malay? What does it mean to be Muslim and Malaysian? And I thought this would be a good chance for me to reflect on my identity. I think part of the reason why I wanted to do this video, in case you were wondering, was there are 3 reasons. So firstly, I have a lot of Malay Muslim friends in Singapore, and their happiness is my happiness. So like, if I can better understand their needs, it helps me to be a better friend to them. So I think this book, even though it's set in Malaysia, I think there are many parallels in Singapore. It helps me to better understand what it is like to be Malay and Muslim, even though it's quite different, I think. Yeah, so I want to be a better friend. Secondly, I also have an interest to learn more about Islam. So since leaving the evangelical church 7 years ago, I've explored different religions like Buddhism, Taoism. I think Islam was something that I was always interested in. And I think this book didn't talk about Islam directly, but around it, I learned, I guess, in passing, things like Wahhabism, Sufism, Salafis. Very interesting. I would like to read more about each denomination. So if you have good books, also recommend me in the comments and I'll get to them. I believe that Islam is a religion of peace. And people who make it out otherwise, I don't think are representing the religion correctly. I might be wrong since I'm not yet Muslim. But yeah, I think Islam is a religion of peace and it's a beautiful religion, and yeah, I like to talk about it. And thirdly, I like to use my Chinese privilege to speak out on issues that my Malay Muslim friends in Singapore might not be able to, because it's difficult in Singapore to speak up about things. So yeah, lastly, I'll quote from the last page of the book, page 130. Okay, so the last quote of the day is this: "We are like books. Most people only see our cover. The minority read only the introduction. Many people believe the critics. Few will know our content. By Emily Zola. So with that, I end this video. If you'd like to support this video, please subscribe, and also you can donate if you'd like to see more of such content to Ko-fi, that's ko-fi/makan and meaning. And if you'd like to buy me some books, I've got a wish list linked in the bio. You can leave a comment to let me know what you think of the video. See you in the next video. Bye!
So done? So ready?
Yeah, it's gonna be on YouTube. Thank you again.